Hello, I'm your host, Sarah Webb, and this is Science in Parallel, a new podcast about people and projects in computational science. In this season, we'll discuss how computers are helping scientists work on climate change and alternative energy and study quantum control, 2D materials, and hot, dense electrons. The common theme is the Department of Energy Computational Science Graduate Fellowship Program, or CSGF for short. All our guests this season are fellows or alumni of the program, which is celebrating its 30th anniversary this year. To kick off the podcast and this season, I'll be speaking with Jeff Hittinger. Jeff is the director for the Center for Applied Computing, called CASC, at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Jeff has a long history with CSGF. He was a fellowship recipient from 1996 to 2000 while completing his PhD at the University of Michigan, and he remains active in shaping the fellowship today. We'll be talking about scientist chimeras, definitions of scientific success, and how to build a good science analogy. Welcome, Jeff. It's great to have you.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, where I'd like to start actually is for you to talk to me a bit about your current work at Livermore. What are you working on? What are your key responsibilities?
My key responsibility right now as the director for CASC is I've got on the order of 150, mostly PhD researchers in computational mathematics, computer science, data science, computational physics, and just trying to keep that organization doing all that it does. So it acts as a bridge organization. So we work directly with many of the programs at the laboratory, helping them make the best use of the computational resources that we have. We do a lot of fundamental research, and through that, we interact a lot with the outside world, a lot with academia, with industry partners. So we kind of stand at that intersection, that crossroads between what's going on inside the lab, what's going on outside, and try to bring in the best from the outside, develop our own capabilities, and address the needs that the programs have at the laboratory. In my spare time, when I still get to do some technical work, my background is in computational fluid dynamics originally. So, more broadly, discretization methods for partial differential equations. Ever since I came to the lab 20 years ago, I have worked on the simulation of plasmas.
Plasmas are gases that are made up of charged atoms or molecules.
Mostly continuum models of plasmas. So I cut my teeth early on doing laser plasma interaction, one of the big experimental facilities at Livermore. And well, Livermore has always been a leader in the science and development of laser technology. We currently have the National Ignition Facility, which is the biggest, most powerful laser on Earth. Interesting things happen when you shoot lasers into plasmas. Since then, I've worked on those sorts of problems in inertial confinement fusion. I've worked on magnetic confinement fusion problems. Most recently, I led a project on variable precision computing, which was reevaluating the foundational way that we represent numbers in the computer, trying to find ways to reduce the amount of data that we're storing and moving around, since that's become the big bottleneck in high performance computing these days. So we were developing some pretty clever ways of working with compressed data types and fundamentally having compressed data types on the computer that locally decompress only when you need to operate on them, which potentially could have really big savings for things like GPUs and other memory bound applications.
GPUs are graphics processing units, often used in high performance computers to boost processing speed.
I had the pleasure of leading a really talented team of researchers there working on that, who ran the gamut from people working on fundamental compiler technologies to application scientists and computer scientists, applied mathematicians, all looking at these various problems and trying to build the foundation for it. So we did a lot of mathematical analysis to justify the methods. We worry a lot that any of the approximations we make still guarantee that we get the right answer. So we put a large emphasis on that.
So, I want to take a step back. Can you tell me a little bit about how you first got interested in science and math? And were there key people or key experiences that, sort of seeded the Jeff that came later?
Oh, yeah, sure. Of course there were. Things that come to mind, my uncle and his wife are both lieutenant colonels in the Air Force and lived in the DC area. So we would always visit them every summer. And I think early on I was exposed to the Smithsonian Institute and the Air and Space Museum and the Natural History Museum. I mean, ever since I was, I don't know, 4 and went to my dad and told him I wanted to be a paleontologist when I grew up. You know, I've kind of tended in that direction. Certainly, those were formative years that I got to see all kinds of technology, and I had a great fourth grade teacher, Mr. Lieberman. And I still remember projects I did in that class on radio telescopes and other such things. He was very much encouraged me, and he clearly had a passion for science, and I think that kind of started me down that path. But yeah, I was programming computers at an early age, and math came naturally to a certain degree. So I don't know if anyone's born to be a a scientist, but certainly I don't think it surprised anyone.
Mm-hmm.
I also was one of those kids constantly taking things apart and losing my dad's tools, which he still reminds me to this day when I complain about my son losing my tools. So what goes around comes around, I guess.
Exactly. Exactly. What goes around comes around. So when I was preparing for this interview, I was looking at one of your old talks that I found, and there was a. I'm going to be quoting you back at yourself, I
Oh
guess.
dear.
But that you had a slide in one of your presentations to the CSGF where you talked about that the CSGF tends to create chimeras, and I wanted you to talk a little bit about that and what that statement means to you, and talk a little bit about the CSGF and your career path.
At the core of CSGF is a foundational belief that excellent computational science lives at the intersection of several domains. It doesn't live cleanly in an application domain in physics and engineering. It doesn't live cleanly in applied mathematics. It doesn't live cleanly in computer science. And certainly when CSGF was founded and computational science was still a relatively new thing, it was hard to figure out where to find it in universities. And so one of the goals of CSGF when it was founded was to try and create this kind of interdisciplinary training. And it has done so, and done so spectacularly well. What's very interesting about that to me, for a variety of reasons, in terms of the program of study that you have to do, where you have to take courses in a variety of different areas. The program itself, though, actually kind of selects for people who have the right aptitude, who see the benefits of that multidisciplinary training and working in interdisciplinary teams. That's a hallmark of what goes on at the laboratories, I think, which is also why a lot of folks enjoy going to the labs who are part of the program. But it does tend to train people then who have this broader perspective. They can see the connections between certain models or certain ways of doing things in applied mathematics, and how those relate to things in computer science or in some physical domain. Oddly, what it also then does is it creates people who don't fit cleanly into any of those departments, which is an interesting thing. Different disciplines have different languages and they have different philosophies. And you learn about that when you are in the CSGF program. When you get to a place like the laboratory, where in our case, for instance, we have a great deal of emphasis on multidisciplinary teams. Sometimes disciplines cannot communicate effectively with each other. And invariably, I have found that CSGF fellows and alumni end up often being the bridge person in that arrangement, because they speak the languages, or at least they speak enough of the language, or they understand the perspective that field has and why they're saying what they're saying, and can help translate and bring the team together. And I've definitely noticed that in my career at Livermore, that even if it's not a project that I'm running, often become that person who is helping to keep the discussions going and keeping a sense of consistency amongst what everyone thinks they're doing. Make sure everyone's actually communicating effectively. So yeah, you end up not being, as a CSGF alumni, you end up not being maybe genuinely a, what have you, applied mathematician or computer scientist. You're something that and more. And then the other thing that's really funny that I always get a kick out of is that no one ever knows what you are. Frequently, amongst physicists, I'm a computer scientist. Amongst applied mathematicians, I'm a physicist or engineer. Amongst computer scientists, I'm an applied mathematician. So it's you definitely appear differently to these different communities because you do have this broader perspective.
Cool. It just seems like it must be kind of fun to be able to kind of wear these different hats now and then.
Oh, sure, sure, of course it is. Yeah. Well, and it's also fun that you can really you can appreciate a lot more, right? You can go to a lot more seminars and dig deeper into what they're saying.
But, I mean, you've clearly taken involvement in the fellowship to kind of a whole new level with the fact that you've been a fellow, you've been involved with the fellowship, over all this time, and now you're even a PI on the fellowship itself. So I guess I wanted to get a sense of, what that level of involvement has been like for you, because that's a whole other level of involvement beyond being a fellow and alumnus part of the community. You are a leader in the community.
Yeah, I don't. I can honestly say I didn't set out to with that in mind. Things kind of snowball on you, I guess. I mean, I guess in some respects, I don't not only talk the talk, but I walk the walk, and I've been clearly shaped by this program and have internalized what I think are its strengths and benefits, and I care deeply about it. I think it does a great job of expanding the horizons for computational scientists, people who are going to be engaged in applying computation to science in a way that they wouldn't ordinarily get just by going to a program where the emphasis is going to be much more on their research activity, their specific domain science research activity, and it would be up to the good graces of their advisor and their willingness to take on extra work to do it on their own. CSGF provides the freedom to do it in the sense that because they have their own funding, they have the opportunity to steer their direction. It gives them an excuse to do it. The program of study, which lays out the coursework that they need to do in the various different areas, can be seen as a requirement. I know when I was in it, I thought as an opportunity because I got to take more classes. I was a junkie with regard to taking classes because I always wanted to know more about other areas. And, I see it as giving the fellows the freedom to tell their advisor, look, I have to go take these courses over in the math department, right? Or CS department or what have you. Coming to the program reviews where you meet the other fellows who are all in different areas, different fields of science, coming from different backgrounds, seeing their technical presentations and their posters and having those discussions. You wouldn't ordinarily have those interactions necessarily, since many of us, when we go to our technical conferences or going to narrower, more specialized conferences where everyone's doing the same thing, I don't get to see many biologists, for instance, in the conferences that I would ordinarily go to for the plasma physics. So that's really cool because you can make all these connections with people who are outside, and you can find similarities and fertilize ideas across the different fields. Uh, Invariably, lots of things get invented multiple times in multiple fields. And you can accelerate that whole process if you talk amongst the fields. So, yeah, I mean, it's a great program, and I'm thrilled to be a part of making sure that it's healthy and continues to grow. and continues to adapt as computational science has continued to grow and change over the years. Um, and I have a hard time saying no when CREL comes knocking and says, "Hey, we need help with this," because I know it's for a really good cause.
So I want to ask you a slightly broader question. There are many ways, obviously, to measure success in science, and particularly at different points in a career. And I guess I was sort of interested in how you measure success today and how maybe you've measured it at other points in your scientific career.
Sure, that potentially is a loaded question, but you are correct that my view of it has evolved over time. Certainly, I think when you first launch into your research career, it's all about papers and getting proposals funded and um, giving talks and establishing yourself in a community. And I think that's a very valid measure. It certainly, I think, is the most common measure of success in the scientific research community. Perhaps there's some faults there that maybe we rely a little too much on publication. Uh, you see lots of papers that are more incremental than maybe they need to be, because there's too much emphasis put on numbers and not so much on quality. But that's an issue for that's a bigger issue. Coming to a lab, I have a different perspective, and success is measured differently there. And I was fortunate to come into CASC relatively early in its existence. It's CSGF is celebrating 30 years. CASC is celebrating 25 this year. So, and I've been there for 20 of those. CASC is unique, sort of at the lab, in the sense that it, as I said, straddles the programs at the laboratory and the external academic world. And so you can kind of be successful in that academic mode within my organization. You can also be completely successful by purely focusing on the programs and helping the programs meet their mission. And that's something that's a really nice thing about the laboratories, is that you do have a mission. You have a mission to expand science, or in the case of the national security labs like Livermore, to expand science in support of the national security interests of the country. So there's a contributing to a greater whole there. Contributing to the programs is another way to define success. And now running CASC, I appreciate both ends of the spectrum and everything in between. So certainly my thoughts have evolved over that. They've, again, have evolved beyond that, because now I'm in management, right? I've gone from being a rank and file scientist to being a group leader, and now a division leader.
I mean, that's part of that was actually my next question, was kind of leadership and what's involved in that sort of transition and thought process there too.
Well, right, yeah. So that's another. We all have our different aptitudes and abilities, and I think I'm a decent scientist. I know plenty of other people who I highly respect, who are, I think, much more brilliant than I am, and perhaps more innovative, and I wouldn't want them to venture off into line management and people management, because it'd be a waste of their talents. I think I have a pretty good aptitude for motivating people and helping get people organized, and breaking down barriers and getting people the resources they need. I think I've got a pretty good view of where things are going, or actually what probably motivates me more, of trying to direct where things are going. What ultimately led me into management and some of these roles over the years has been a desire to have a seat at the table and help impact and influence where things are going, as opposed to just responding to the current. And so far, no one's complained, but I think I do I think I'm doing a service there for the folks I represent, and I see that that's another way to impact the scientific community in that sort of leadership role. That isn't one necessarily of being, the leader in the field with the newest, best ideas, but being someone who can take in all that information and appreciate the science and appreciate how all the pieces come together and where they're pushing us. Especially in computational science, where there's lots of pressures between what can be done, what the scientists want to do and be able to do, what the mathematics limits us to be able to do, the computer science behind where the new machines are going, because we're in a really interesting transition right now and crossroads, because the technologies that we've relied on for the last 30 plus years are reaching sort of an end point with what they can do. And we're seeing all kinds of new ideas sprouting up with regard to the hardware. And then that has a downstream effect on everything else of what we can do. And so to be able to look at all that and pull it together and build a sense of where we should go, or where I think we should go, and to try and help get the community to move in that direction, that's where I find my satisfaction these days. I don't get to write much code anymore or solve real meaty science problems. I also, I do get to, I am engaged in many scientific projects where I can help advise younger scientists and help mentor them, which is something else that I really enjoy. So I still stay in touch with my roots that way, by maybe not being hands-on, but giving them my insights and suggestions as to where to go.
I know one thing that you've been a part of is the Livermore Ambassadors, and I wanted to ask you about science outreach and communication, and I want to get your experiences, what that's been like for you, and even advice you might have for other scientists who are trying to embark on this work.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a different type of communication, right? So the Ambassador Series is a series of lecturers. There's about 10 of us, I guess, from Livermore, who go to the UC campuses and give technical talks, technical seminars that are more broadly accessible to hopefully undergraduates, with the goal of really getting people interested in science. It's pretty well known that there's a challenge of diversity in the scientific fields, and one of the reasons for that is that we don't do a good job of attracting people to the scientific fields. And in fact, I dare say that most undergraduates don't realize that you can have a very fulfilling career in science, right? They see all of the money in Silicon Valley or other things like that, and never even consider, say, a career at a national laboratory, and don't realize that that's an option that exists. And so they don't go to grad school because of that. And so it we have this ever decreasing pool of potential candidates. Diversity isn't just some kind of PC concept. I'm speaking, as a CSGF person, it's about diversity. A diversity of experience, diversity of training. We think at Livermore, for instance, when we make these multidisciplinary teams, that's a strength of what we do. That we come up with better solutions because we were looking at the problems from a whole bunch of angles. And that's one form of diversity, but studies show that you're better off having more diversity. You get better solutions. You explore the solution space better. So that's one of the reasons that we want to do it. The knack of kind of giving those kinds of talks, I have found, is but they have to be entertaining, of course. So it's always helpful. You have to have a good hook that draws people in, mm-hmm. and much like comedy, it's always good if you could somehow loop back to that by the end of the talk and get back to where you started. I have found mostly it's about analogy, right? Trying to find what doesn't have to be a perfect analogy, but what's a good analogy that your audience would readily relate to, that you can draw to try and connect them to what you're trying to talk about. And because you're not trying to make them an expert, right? You're not trying to teach them about the nuance of some detail. You're trying to give them an idea, right? You want to give them an idea about what you do. They don't have to be an expert by the end of your talk.
So something that they can walk away from and say, "Oh, Jeff does that." Right?
Yeah, oh, exactly.
So what's your favorite analogy that you've come up with for a talk like this?
Interestingly, it was a talk I had to give about work that I didn't do, which is another skill you have to develop when you become a manager. Is you have to be able to understand the science of the people who work for you and be able to represent it. One of the challenges of moving to the new machines is we have to rewrite our codes. So there's been a lot of work put into something called abstraction layers and programming abstractions. And so one example of this is Cocos and Raja. When Cocos was developed at Sandia, Raja was developed at Livermore. They effectively do the same thing, but they were developed for different reasons. And I use the analogy for a very pertinent one for the Bay Area of what happened after the 1989 earthquake and the bridges that we have in the area, right? Ultimately, what happened there is we retrofitted the Golden Gate Bridge, and you probably wouldn't notice all the seismic improvements that were done there because we wanted to preserve the character of that bridge, right? The Bay Bridge, on the other hand, right, we just finished building the new Bay Bridge many, many years later. But instead of being the double-decker bridge going from Oakland over to San Francisco, it's now, single story. Well, it's a beautiful bridge if you ever get a chance to look at it. When they light it up, it's pretty cool. So those were two different strategies. One was start from scratch and redo it, and the other was, well, how do we keep it in place? And those are the differences really between Cocos and Raja. Cocos is better at, I'm starting a code from scratch. Raja was developed here because we have a long history of developing scientific software that we rely on for our mission. And rewriting all those codes from scratch and doing it over and over again is not really an option. So we were looking for something that, how could we make this work in retrofit, I guess, to a certain degree. But then I was able to bring it back to earthquakes because we have one of the top performing seismic simulation codes in the world, SW4. That's part of the Exascale Computing Project, and it uses Raja and gets phenomenal performance, such that they've been able to do simulations all the way to the frequencies that you would need to get to start looking at how those impact buildings.
Cool.
Which is groundbreaking. They hadn't been able to get to that before. And that was enabled by being able to put the seismic code SW4 on these new class of supercomputers, and that was enabled by using Raja. So I got it all the way back to earthquakes.
I love it.
In the end. I hope it worked as a talk, but yeah. So maybe that's my favorite.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good one anyway. Are you up for a lightning round?
Sure.
What's your favorite element on the periodic table?
Well, livermorium, of course. When you work in a lab with its own element, come on.
But as a physicist, do you have a favorite subatomic particle?
Well, quarks are kind of quirky, right? So.
And what was your first computer?
Oh, a Trash 80.
And do you have a favorite computer?
Do I have a favorite computer? I don't know that I actually do. I've been fortunate enough to see a whole bunch of different kinds of computers and build a whole bunch of different computers over my lifetime. I don't know. My favorite computer is usually the latest one I built.
That seems fair. I guess it's a little like asking you your favorite child, right? If you've built a bunch.
Yeah, I can't, won't go there.
Exactly. So to wrap up, I want to ask you one final question. What's the key piece of advice that you like to pass on to early career computational scientists?
Don't say no just because you're scared about an area being something that you don't know anything about. It's very enriching to go into areas and learn and discover the parallels and connections to what you know, and to learn the new things which enrich how you solve problems in general. I don't like seeing people self-limit just because they're a little concerned that like, oh, I don't know enough about that. Jump in, you know. Certainly when you've done the training to become a research scientist, you've demonstrated the ability to teach yourself and to learn. And, you can do it. So take advantage of those opportunities. Obviously, within limit, there's a point at which people get oversubscribed, but it's usually not a problem with the early career scientists. They're usually a little more, circumspect about whether or not they can handle something. You don't know till you'll try, and it's okay to fail. You learn more from failing than you do from succeeding, honestly. I mean, that's been my experience, is that the lessons I have learned the best are the ones that have come out of failure, not out of success. So don't worry about that. Don't limit yourself.
Cool. So, Jeff, I want to thank you for your time and for this conversation. This was a pleasure. Thank you for being here.
Sure, it's been fun.
To learn more about Jeff, the Center for Applied Computing, or the CSGF, please check out our show notes at scienceinparallel.org. If you like this episode, please share it with a friend or colleague and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Science in Parallel is produced by the Krell Institute and highlights computational science with a particular focus on work by fellows and alumni of the Department of Energy Computational Science Graduate Fellowship Program. Krell administers this program for the U.S. Department of Energy. Our music was written by Steve O'Reilly. This episode was produced and edited by me, Sarah Webb.